let's get started. Thanks for joining us here in lovely Antwerp for the Activiti and Vaadin presentation, A Match Made in Heaven. I'm Frederik Heremans. I'm from Alfresco. I'm a software engineer.
And I'm Holmström, and I work as software architect at Vaadin, which is, by the way, how we pronounce it.
Yeah. Well said. So, what's this all about, actually? You may remember you registering for a Devoxx conference. If you didn't, you climbed over a fence and got in for free. But most of you people saw the Devoxx registration application. So actually, it's two parts. So the part you guys saw, where the client, the people could register themselves for the conference. There's also a second part, which allows the Devoxx staff to keep an eye on the registrations, look how many people registered and things like that. So we used the Vaadin UI for the front-end technology and an Activiti backend. So since it's a Java conference, it made sense to use some cool Java technologies for this. So when Stefan asked us, we didn't hesitate and just went along with it. We used some additional technologies, for example, Hibernate for object persistence, since there was already a small part of the object model available for us. So we just leveraged that and took it in. We did some validation as well, using the GSR 303 for validating all the input you guys give us to get it in our model safely. And we used Spring to glue it all together. So why are we here? I'm asking myself the same question sometimes, but so the architecture we came up with turned out to be an effective way to work. So it was easy to fix. Sometimes some bugs came up and we could easily identify which part of the application we should address or which part of, so which one was responsible for doing it. Also, the features requested, some additional features were easy to implement as well. So we're not going to show you the dark secrets of Devoxx registration today. We just want to show you some patterns and best practices for working with Activiti and Vaadin. So we're going to show you another application we made using similar techniques we did for Devoxx registration. But first, what is Activiti? So anyone in the room knows Activiti? Raise their hands. And anyone actually used it somewhere? All right, lucky few. So it's quite a lot of people don't know it, so it's going to be quite entertaining. So what is Activiti? It's an open source BPM engine. It's Apache licensed, so you can do whatever you want with it. It's written in Java, pure Java. So we try to make it very lightweight, allow it to be embeddable in your own application. The best example of this is actually Alfresco repository, which uses Activiti under the hoods to drive the workflows on the document. So it's a good example of the embeddability. It's also customizable, so we provided a lot of hook points for you to get in your custom code in or to really control what the engine is doing. So last but not least, it has first-class testing support. So we're all Java developers. We test our services. We test everything until nothing's remained to test. So it's very important to us that you can test your business process as well. So it doesn't make sense if you just test your service layer and then just hope your process works. So we tried to do our best to have some first-class testing support for JUnit 3 and 4 and Spring, so you can really test your process thoroughly. So it's not only an Alfresco effort, it's actually quite a big community contributing to it. The core team is all Alfresco employees, but there's some external contributors from all over the world. We have an active community, and our motto from the beginning was release fast, release often. So in the beginning, we released every month. So I think a year and a couple of months ago, we started releasing every month, giving bug fixes and features to the people, rolling out very quickly. So now we stepped a bit back, and every 2-3 months we're releasing. So that's a bit how the community works. When taking a step back, what we do is actually business processes. So if you look up what a business process is on Wikipedia, it's a vague description of, it's a collection of related activities and tasks for a particular goal. Makes sense. And it's visualized with a flowchart. So in the past, there were different ways of defining how a process looks. So most of the time, we just put it in a big model. So a while back, some smart people sat around the table and think about what's a good way to actually model or define how a business process should look like or should behave. So that's where BPMN 2.0 stepped in the picture. So it's an OMG standard finalized in March this year. It's actually a pure play BPM standard, so really endorsed by big vendors like Oracle and IBM, SAP, some of the big guys. So not just some invented standards at some university, but really from the industry. It standardizes shapes in what you can use to draw your process. It also adds standard execution semantics, so you don't only specify how your process looks, but also how the execution will behave. Last but not least, the file format is standard, so this means you can just switch the editors and just throw around your models from one to another, so it's a standard format. And that's what we use in an activity. So how does it work? You take the engine, you throw in your processes and your own Java code, so you can, it's easy to integrate with your own services. Activiti does all the heavy lifting, like timers, jobs, process handling, and it gives you a clean API which you can access. You can get the workflows, you can start some processes, you can get tasks. It allows you to manage your engine, so it's a clean API which gives you full control of your engine you're running. We also have an support for forms, so when your process needs to interact with people, we offer some standard form support. In the example we're giving today, we don't use the form support, we leverage the richness of the Vaadin UI. So you're free to use the forms, you can just use anything you want. However, it's more than just a library. So it's a good library, you can just use it as a jar in your project, but we offer some tools to make your life easier. For example, our Activity Designer. This is an Eclipse plugin, which is freely available and allows you to model the process from within your development environment. So it not only allows you to draw valid BPMN diagrams, it also allows you to really hook in the logic beneath it. So that's quite powerful. So it's really activity tailored, so the process you draw here, you can actually just start executing without any intervention in XML or something. We also have a web-based modeler, which is for the business people who don't want to install an Eclipse or something, or afraid of installing stuff. So it runs in your browser. The only downside is it's not really has not really much of activity tailored stuff in it. So it's very good BPMN editor, but if you really want to execute it on Activity, there's an extra step needed. You need implementation details by hand. So when you download Activity, we ship our UI. It's written in Vaadin. This is actually a UI that covers our full API. So with this, you can start processes, view the tasks, inspect your database as well, inspect what jobs are running, or they might have been stuck. So it's actually the UI to communicate to the Activity engine, if you want it. You can write your own, of course. To conclude, some technical highlights, which I think are quite useful. So we support a lot of the BPMN 2.0 constructs. So this allows you to do timers, events, gateways, multi-instance tasks. So it's really all the heavy lifting you should otherwise do with threading and all crazy constructs in Java. You can just use our engine and don't care about that, just use it. We also have some activity extensions which make the XML you create a bit shorter. So if you really want to develop in XML, write a process in XML, we allow some shorthands to make it less verbose. It's also first-class Spring support, so if you want a wider application with Spring, it's just tailored for that, so it's really nice as well. We have some built-in handling for GPA entities, so you could basically stuff anything in the process as a variable, but if you use GPA entities, instead of just serializing the whole entity, we just keep a reference, and later on just fetch it from your entity manager. So it's it's a standard integration. If you want to have other models, you can, of course, just add it to have a pluggable type mechanism. So in the latest version, or the version before that, CDI support was added. So this allows you to use your engine in a CDI environment and call beans from there. Now I pass it over to Peter.
All right, so covering all the ins and outs of Vaadin would probably take more than an hour, so I tried to select the most essential parts and do it all in about 4 minutes or so. So what's Vaadin? Well, first of all, Vaadin is actually a Finnish word for a female reindeer. And this is something you can see in our logo as well if you turn it 90 degrees sideways. The curly bracket that form the horns also represent Java, and the greater than sign that forms the nose represents HTML. So that's the story behind our logo. Vaadin is also a user interface framework for desktop-like web applications. So now some of you might think that this means you need to learn yet another set of configs, taglibs, or syntax, or mess around with JavaScript and DOM and applets and plugins and stuff like that. Well, fortunately, no. This is pure Java and nothing else. You don't even need to know an HTML or CSS to create good-looking web user interfaces with Vaadin. You could think of Vaadin like a set of Legos. You start with very small building blocks, and then you build up larger systems from these. And in the case of Vaadin, the building blocks are the components, some of which you can see on the screen over here. We have quite a lot of components already out of the box available for you. If that's not sufficient, we have a directory service from which you can download and install additional components. And if that's not sufficient for you, you can write your own. Now, how does Vaadin fit into the Java ecosystem? Over here we can see some of the standard user interface libraries of Java. As you can see on the enterprise side we have JSP, JSF, and JavaFX, and on the standard side we have Swing. Now, although Vaadin is not an official Java standard, you could think of it as the enterprise counterpart to Swing. The architecture in one slide. Basically, in a Vaadin application, your entire application is living on the server side, and only the document object model resides in the browser. And the browser part is completely handled by the framework, so you can forget about the client side altogether. This makes it really simple to implement your user interfaces. First of all, as I said, you can forget about the client side. Then the framework will make sure that the state of your user interface on the client remains in sync with the state on the server and vice versa. And also, as your user interface is actually running on the server, you have access to all the server resources. So if you like to add some more memory, then you add some more memory. And if you want to use some custom hardware, then you use custom hardware. We also think this approach is pretty flexible because you can use almost any Java tool or library in your user interface. And you can even use your favorite Java language, such as Scala, Clojure, or Groovy. We also think this approach is more secure than the conventional JavaScript-based user interfaces, and this is because of two things. First of all your code stays in the server, so it's impossible for a hacker to download your JavaScript code and analyze it in order to look for vulnerabilities. And also there are a lot less web services to protect. In a Vaadin application, you basically have one single entry point, and that's an application servlet. So, what can you do with Vaadin, and what do other people do with it? I've collected some screenshots here of different Vaadin applications. As you can see, they are all actually very different from different fields. But they have one thing in common, and that is that they are all web applications, not websites. So they've all been made for a particular purpose in order to solve a particular problem, and they just happen to use the web server and web browser as their user interface. So this is basically what Vaadin is all about in a couple of minutes. Now let's move on with a little storytelling.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Let's tell you a story. So instead of doing the registration process, we just decided to do something more original. So we're gonna do a travel process. So it's quite simple. We have a company. It sends people off to conferences abroad. So the first thing they should do is request if they can go. So that's what the process starts with. Then the manager needs to accept or approve it. If he says no, you can't go, the employee just get a mail containing yes, so you can go. So that's easy. So if he can go, some stuff should happen. So in our process, the secretary gets a task and she should book the tickets for the guy. When that's booked, a task is available for the employee. So when he returns from his travel and he comes home and he has all these small receipts, he can start filling his expenses to get everything back, so everything's happy at the end of the month. So once he fills in his expenses, he completes the task, and they get paid by someone at payroll in the last part of the process.
All right, and now I'm gonna show you this application in monitoring here. Mirror displays. Now we should be able to see my screen. Great. And this is the application running. It's the same application, but I'm running 3 different instances of it in 3 different browsers. And as you can see, this is Steven Secretary's instance in a lovely red header. And then we have Tom Traveler here with the black header and Mike Manager with the green header. So now Tom is going to go for a little trip. So we start the request process. Let's go to Belgium. I want to go to Devoxx. Commit. Now, all of a sudden, we get a notification here in my manager's window. You can see that there are unassigned tasks, approve request. I can assign it to myself to do it later, or I can complete it immediately. So here I can see the details of my request. And of course, you can go and I approve it. Now something happened here in Steven's Secretary's screen. There's another unassigned task, book tickets. So Steven calls the traveling agency and books the tickets, and when that's done, he just clicks this button there. Now, again, there's a new task. It's already assigned to Tom, enter expenses, he returns from the trip, adds some expenses, let's say he had a taxi drive for 20 euros, and as we're in Antwerp, he bought some diamonds for 10,000 euros. And then some guy at payroll arrives at the end of the month, sees, there's a payout expenses task here for 1,020 euros. Okay, let's just pay. And that's it. Now, naturally, this process has a few flaws.
Yeah, expenses are skyrocketing, as you saw. He was buying diamonds, and some other people got stuck at the hotel bar at 12 o'clock at night drinking whiskey with the Scottish guy. So it's just out of control. So we need to do something. So in order to have some live coding, we just add an extra step or two to our process. So instead of just paying the expenses at the end, first the manager needs to approve if they're actually justified. So we add an extra user task and a gateway behind it to decide he can reject them or approve them. If he rejects them, the process just flows back to Tom, the traveler guy, and saying, fill in again, just enter expenses again and remove this or this or this. So,
right. So now we're going to do this. Now let's hope the switcher is working. Yes.
All right. Let's do some coding. I'm a bit better at that than presenting. At least that's what I say to my boss. So, all right. So here I have an Eclipse with the project just pulled from Git. We have, of course, as good developers, created a test for our process. So just run it again to make sure it still works. So this is what I was talking about the testing support we provide. Let's have a quick look. So it's just a simple test, JUnit 4 running with Spring configuration, just wiring some services we need. And we have a special annotation which shipped with Activiti, which allows you to deploy a process, which in our case is our travel process, within the context of the test you're running. So this allows you to have one test method, have it running in a certain context, so that you know when you start your method, you're sure that that process is deployed in your engine, and you're starting from a clean database. So this is one thing that makes the testing a bit easier. You also see the activity rule. It's a JUnit 4 rule, which makes sure that the deployment annotation is scanned and activity stuff is available. All right, so the first thing we do is we alter our process, of course. So we have it right here. So this is the editor I was talking about earlier. So it's just a plugin you download and you can start playing around. So we were just going to add an extra step before paying out the expenses. So we remove this one. Come on. We can keep this part, we're still paying out. We add an extra task, as we said. Full expenses. Then a decision right after it. One going down and one going back up. Just make it look a bit nicer. There. So then we go fill in some details to make it actually work, not just look pretty.
Okay. It's back to enter expenses. So the second arrow.
Sorry?
So after the decision, you go back to enter expenses and not to approve expenses.
Yes. Ah. Damn. Thank you. You get a free T-shirt. All right. That was just a test to see the audience was still awake. Good job. So, now, as I said, we're going to fill in some details. Just call it a nicer name. Approve expenses. We're going to make it only available for a manager. So, we say the performer type is again group. Should be part of the group management. The next thing we should do is actually, this is a gateway, so it will only choose one of the two paths. So in order to have it decide, we're going to tell to this path, you only take this path if the manager actually approved. So later in the service, we'll just make sure there's a variable available in our process, which is the invoice itself. So it's our GPA bean. So we can just write an expression. To check if it's actually approved. So if it's not, it will take the other flow which has no condition on it. Right, so our process is ready. The next thing we do is take our travel invoice service. It's actually the service that's going to be called from the UI by Better. So we'll have to add two methods. It's approve invoice and just give a motivation why it's not approved. So the same for rejecting. So now just implement those two methods. Here they are. So we're using existing domain models and process, we should make sure that everything runs in one transaction. So we add the Spring transactional annotation. Another annotation we created is something custom, which is require group. So we actually say to the system that only people in the group management, so it's using the activity user management, so only people in the group management can actually invoke this method. So if somewhere from within the system something goes wrong and this method is invoked by another user, it's an exception is thrown. So this is a bit of security built in using annotations on their services. So we're going to do that for the reject as well, because it's the same. Actually, those two methods are basically identical. So we're just going to make a shared method, which is set decision and save. Passing in the invoice, motivation, and then the decision. Here on denied. Decision. Alright. So now we'll start implementing. So as I said, we're going to do three things. First, update the model. Second thing is set the variable. So later on in our flow it's used to make the decision, to choose a path. And the third thing is actually completing the task. So updating the model is the easiest part. Just set the decision based on the decision we pass in and the motivation. We use the current user, since we're sure that he's in a manager group, we can just use him as a manager. So, and we do it today or now, alright? Of course, we should validate. We have some utility for that, which just throws an error when the invoice fails validation. And the easy thing is, Peter will handle that in the UI. I'll just throw the validation exception. So if no exception is thrown, we'll just save it. This is a simple save. Alright, so this is the first part. The second part is setting a variable. So if you want to set a variable, you should get hold of the process instance that's actually driving our request or travel request. So we prepared a method for this, which is actually quite simple. It just calls one of the activity APIs. It creates a process instance query, and it requests the process instance with a certain business key. So you can start off a process and associate your own business key with it, so you can find it back quite easy afterwards. So in our case, it's just the ID of the travel request that was created initially when the process started. So once we have the process instance, we can just say set variable, get the ID, we call it invoice, and the value is the invoice, of course. Alright. The last thing is completing the task. So again, we use the activity APIs to get a hold of the task that's currently active in the process. So we create a task query. It's all fluent, the APIs are queries, so you can just keep on typing. So I say give me all tasks within this process. And just to be sure, we filter on the task name. So definition key, sorry. So I think it was approve expenses. And we request a single result. So last thing to do is just actually complete it. What is the ID? Right. So this is actually a service is ready to use for Peter when he's going to build the UI. The one thing I want to show is that our unit test, of course, is going to fail since we added some extra steps in the process. It should fail, otherwise it's not a good unit test, of course. So I'm hoping it will fail for once. No, it won't. I didn't save it, sorry. Should save, very important. it takes quite a long time to run the unit test because we're running actually, we're running actually in the full context. So instead of mocking out services, we actually use the GPA services in our tests. This is a personal choice, of course. You can always just mock out everything else and just test your bare process. It's actually a choice you can make yourself. So we're just gonna pretend the test will fail. I think something is wrong with the location of my process. However, simple travel.
I think the condition in the sequence flow is wrong.
Is it?
I think you tried to type 2 times the decision.
Yeah, but it is.
It is?
Yeah. It's decision. So it's decision, not decision. That's actually right. All right, but I'm just gonna show you some the thing I was normally if it would fail. So this test is actually the approved path. So you can see all the different steps, and our framework allows you to really just have fine-grained control of what's happening in your system. So for example, we just submit a new travel request. So we will check if it's actually created. So you could do more things. You can check if it's a certain type of, or certain tasks are active. So you can actually re-inspect the state of your process, so you can make sure nothing can go wrong. All right. So I think it's time to pass it on to Peter. So we
switch the monitor again. My screen should show up, yes it does, and I'm going to use NetBeans for a change. So now we need to add a new form to our application so that the manager can actually see the expenses and also type in motivation and select whether he approves or rejects it. And in this application we're utilizing the model view presenter pattern so that we can separate out the user interface logic from the code that actually builds the user interface. Unfortunately, we don't have time to cover the MVP pattern, so I'm just going to do some coding. I'm going to start by creating a new view interface, which we'll call Approve Expenses View. And we have over here, we have a foundation project that contains a couple of abstract base classes that we can use in base interfaces, so I'm just going to extend this task form view interface like this. And now our view needs basically one thing, it's the traveling invoice. Otherwise we won't know what to show to the manager, so I'm just going to add a set invoice method and pass in the travel invoice like this. So this is basically our view interface. Next we're going to create a presenter that will drive our interface. Let's call it Approve Expenses Presenter. And we can extend the base class here as well, task form presenter, and I'll pass in our Approve Expenses view as a generic parameter like this. Now, as we're using Spring and Aspect J, in this case, we have to add this configurable annotation because we're going to auto-inject references to our backend services into this presenter later on. So in the presenter we need to define the actions that the user can do, and in this case it's either approving the invoice, this, or rejecting this. This is our presenter stub, and we're going to leave it like this for now and return to it in a few moments. So now let's concentrate on the actual implementation of our view. Approve Expenses view component. There. And again, I have some base classes. View component. Pass in the view. Presenter. And naturally, I need to implement the view interface as well. And then we should have a lot of abstract methods, or only 2 abstract methods to implement. Again, we need to add configurable. And we're also going to add a new annotation that we've written ourselves. We're using a class path scanner library to detect classes with this task form annotation, and then we pass in a form key, which is used to associate the correct form component with the correct task in the process definition. And this form key is approve expenses. Alright, so let's start doing some Vaadin coding then, because this is basically a Vaadin component that we're creating, a composite component. So let's start with the layout. This. We want some space around the layout, so we're going to turn on the margin, this. And we need some spacing around our components, sub-components as well, so we turn on the spacing. And we also want it to be full size, and as the layout itself is inside of this task form component, we need to set the size of this component to full as well. And if you don't know why I'm doing this, come to our booth and we'll explain. So I'm going to return the layout here. Then we need a title, like this. And we want this title to look like some kind of title, so we're going to assign a style name to it. Reindeer is our default user interface theme, like this. And I'll just add the title. And now we're going to see what this looks like. Right now I'm using an embedded Jetty server to run this. So I have to restart the server. If I were using JRobo right now, I wouldn't be waiting right now. But as I'm not, we're playing the waiting game. There. And I log in again as the manager. Here's an unassigned task, approve expenses, and here's our new form. It only contains a title. So now we need to add some more stuff. First of all, we need to know which travel request is these expenses relate to. So, fortunately, I have over here a travel request viewer component, which I already created and used in some other views. So I can reuse it over here. Travel request viewer component. Request viewer, that's fine. And then we need to show the expenses as well, and as a matter of fact, they happen to have a component for that as well over here. Enter, let's see, it's the expenses viewer component. So I'll add that one as well. Expenses viewer. Expenses viewer. I always tend to mix up the S and C's in the word expenses. Make sure it's right. Then we need a text area for the motivation. Like this. And a few buttons. Approve button, sounds nice. Reject button, not so nice. And a cancel button if it covers. Let's create these components. Request viewer, new travel. Request viewer component, and add it to the layout. Like that. Do the same with the expenses viewer. That. Now we're going to do some user interface stuff, so we're going to specify that the expenses viewer should fill up all the remaining space. And I'm going to set the expand ratio to 2 because I want this expenses viewer component to be twice as tall as the motivation text field, which is something I'm creating right now. Let's use the motivation as a caption. Set it to says file size full. We'll add it to our layout. This. And set the expand ratio. So as you can see, I'm only using Java. I haven't touched a single CSS or HTML file. Then we're going to add some buttons. And I want these buttons to be aligned in a horizontal row, so I'm going to create a separate horizontal layout for this. There. And I want some spacing between the buttons to make it look good, so I'm going to turn on the spacing and add the buttons to my layout. There. Password. And now our view looks like this. So on the top here we have the request component, over here we have our expenses component, then we have the motivation text field and some buttons down here. But it still doesn't do anything. So we'll go back to the code. The first thing we want to do is make sure that we actually show some information. So in this set invoice method, we're going to invoke our request viewer, set request. We get the request from the invoice, this, and then we have the expenses viewer. That. So now we can get the information into the user interface. The next thing we need to do is register some click listeners with the buttons and invoke our presenter. So we invoke the prove method and we take the value of the motivation field and pass it into the parameter. And we do the same for the reject. And finally for the cancel button. And this cancel method that I'm invoking over here is defined in one of those base classes in the foundation package, so that's why it doesn't show up here. It shows up here instead. There's one more thing we need to do before our view component is finished. This has to do with the fact that we use some validation in the service, and if we get a validation error, we need to show it to the user. So I'm overriding a method that's defined in this base class here. And I'm just going to invoke a Vaadin method under motivation text field. Set component error. Creating a new user error. Passing in the message there. So now our view component is finished. So let's go back to the presenter for a while. First thing we're going to need to do in this presenter is get hold of the invoice in some way. And fortunately, I can reuse some code from the pay expenses form presenter. So I'm just going to copy these lines like this. So as you can see here on the top, we're using Spring Auto-Webbing to inject a reference to our travel invoice service that Frederik here refactored, and also have a field that contains the current invoice. This set task form data is called by our form management system that we've implemented in this foundation module. Basically what it allows us to do is to retrieve, we get an process instance ID from the current task, and by using this process instance ID, we can ask our service to return the correct invoice. And once we get the invoice, we'll pass it on to the view so that the user interface can update itself. So then, when we're ready to approve, we're going to invoke this service like this. Reject. And if everything goes well, we want to close the form. We don't want it to remain open. And there's one more thing missing, and that's the validation. So we're going to put a try catch here. That's our validation exception. And if we get a validation, I just pass it on to the view. Now our presenter results are finished, so now let's have a look at what happens. And we play the waiting game a third time. Lots of excitement, exciting log entries here. There we go. And let's reload. So far everything is working nicely. And now we can see the information. Here's the travel request, and we have the diamonds and the taxi. And the boss is not going to load a complaint to buy diamonds for 10,000, so we reject this. So now let's log in as the traveler. Now the enter expenses task is back. And there's one thing missing from this view. We can't see the motivation anywhere. And as we have about 12 minutes left, I have plenty of time to implement this as well. So we're going to go to this. Let's see, it's the enter expenses from view component. And I'm going to add a new label. Let's call it rejection motivation, and we'll add it over here, so that if this request, this invoice has been rejected, we will get the motivation over here between the description and the expenses table. So let's see, that's the expenses editor. We'll add it over here. Rejection motivation. New label. It doesn't contain anything right now. Let's set the caption. Rejected. We want it to be very visible, this label, so we're going to change the styling. Let's use the header 2 style, for example. And we want it to be hidden unless the invoice is actually being rejected. Yeah. So now we have a label that's invisible. We're going to update this set invoice method over here. So, if the decision has been made, and here's the funny chain of methods, decision.decision equals denied, then rejection motivation set value, invoice, get decision, motivation of decision. And of course we need to make it visible. There. And otherwise we'll hide it. That should do it. We'll play the waiting game for the 4th time, in case someone's keeping track. There we go. And it was the team there, and the so now we open up the new form, and now we can see rejected, no diamonds. So Tom just has to remove diamonds and pay them himself. Click save, log out. Mike Manager logs in again. Here it is, another approve expenses task. This looks a lot better, so we approve it, that. And then we have Patrick payroll. Gets the invoice, only 20 euros, sounds good, pays them, and basically that's it. So this is all we wanted to show you today in terms of code. Now we're just going to tell you a little bit about the next step in case you found this was very interesting. Alright, so the first thing you might want to do is download the source code for this demonstration. It's freely available on GitHub. You can download it and do whatever you want with it. You You can build your own applications on top of it. You can rip it apart. And make a note of this URL if you're interested, because this slide is going away in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So if you want to continue on with Activiti, because we just touched the surface of Activiti today, just some user interaction, but there's a lot more to it. So just visit our website, activiti.org, or grab someone of the Activiti team. They're all here right now, I think. Another good place to start is the Activiti in Action, the book by Thijs Rademaker. Is going to be available as an e-book in beginning next year, so it's not a long time anymore. So Manning Early Access is already available. You should definitely check it out if you want to learn more about Activiti.
Yes, and if you thought Vaadin was really great and you want to get started with it, then one thing you could do is visit our website, www.vaadin.com. You should also read the book of Vaadin. It's available online, and as a matter of fact, I happen to have a complete box of books right here, so that 20 or so of you who are the quickest can get a copy for free after this presentation. And you should also definitely come to our booth and talk with us and get a free ref card. Now we have about 7 minutes left for our time slot, so if you have any questions, we're happy to try to answer them.